There are moments in life that are supposed to be unforgettable for all the right reasons. The day I was supposed to marry the man I loved was meant to be one of them. Instead, it became the very moment that marked the end of everything I had been building, a memory carved into my soul with shame and heartbreak. I stood before God, my family, my friends, and the man who had vowed to love me forever. Yet in a matter of minutes, a single voice from my past ripped everything apart. Before I take you deeper into this story, I want to pause and appreciate each of you for being here with me. To my subscribers, thank you for your loyalty and constant support. To all the new and returning viewers who are yet to subscribe, I am truly grateful you are here, and I cannot wait for you to hit that subscribe button because it is the fuel that keeps this channel alive. Please do not forget to engage, drop your thoughts in the comments immediately after this story, and share your perspective. Now, let us step into the truth of what happened to me on the day I should have become a wife. The venue was perfect. A small chapel in a quiet American suburb, decorated with white lilies and satin ribbons that shimmered under the soft glow of sunlight breaking through the stained glass windows. I could hear whispers of admiration from my relatives and the joyful laughter of children running around in their little suits and dresses. Everything felt like a dream, unfolding exactly the way I had always imagined it. My groom, Daniel, stood at the altar, handsome in his tailored suit, his eyes fixed on me with a mixture of awe and tenderness. He had been my anchor for the last 4 years, the one who convinced me that love could be stable, safe, and trustworthy. As I walked toward him, escorted by my father, every step felt like it was carrying me into a new life, free from the shadows of my past. But I was wrong. Shadows do not simply disappear. They follow you until you are forced to confront them. Just as the minister began to speak, calling us to join in holy matrimony, the air inside the chapel shifted. The doors creaked open, and in walked a figure I had not seen in years. At first, my mind refused to believe it. My breath caught in my throat, and the room seemed to shrink around me. It was Matthew, my ex-boyfriend from high school. The boy who once knew every secret I carried. The boy who had witnessed the reckless version of me, the version I had buried long ago. He walked down the aisle with confidence, his eyes locked on me, and the whispers among the guests grew louder. Daniel turned, confusion clouding his face, while I stood frozen, my bouquet trembling in my hands. When the minister asked, "If anyone knows a reason these two should not be joined in marriage, speak now or forever hold your peace," my worst nightmare unfolded. Matthew spoke. "No," he said firmly, his voice echoing through the chapel, "she does not deserve this marriage. She is not who you think she is." The room erupted in gasps. My mother pressed her hand to her mouth. Daniel's face drained of colour. I wanted to scream, to run, to vanish, but my body betrayed me and stood rooted in shame. Matthew's words cut deeper than any knife. He did not stop with that single objection. He went on, each sentence dragging pieces of my past into the open. He talked about high school nights when I had chosen recklessness over dignity, about the string of mistakes I had made with boys who never cared about me, and about the broken trust that had followed me even then. He spoke as though he had been waiting for this moment for years, and with each revelation, the weight of my past pressed harder on my chest. I saw Daniel's expression change. His eyes no longer carried tenderness. Instead, there was hurt, confusion, and the beginning of anger. I wanted to tell him that I was no longer that girl, that I had changed, that the woman standing before him was not defined by the shadows Matthew was dragging into the light. But in that moment, words failed me. My silence became its own confession. The guests stared, some with pity, others with judgment. I could hear faint whispers, fragments of sentences. "I cannot believe this. She hid all of that. Poor Daniel." Each murmur sank into me like poison. My father shifted uncomfortably beside me, his grip tightening on my arm as though he could steady me. My mother's eyes filled with tears, and I could feel the disappointment radiating from her even before she spoke. But it was Daniel's silence that tore me apart the most. He released my hands and stepped back. His face was pale, his jaw clenched, his eyes searching mine for an explanation that I could not give. It was as if the vows we were about to exchange had already shattered, their pieces lying broken between us. The minister tried to regain control of the ceremony, but it was too late. The atmosphere had changed. Joy had been replaced with suspicion, love with doubt, and celebration with disgrace. I turned toward Matthew, my chest heaving with rage and shame. Why now? Why here? Why destroy me in front of everyone I loved? His gaze met mine, steady and cold, as if he believed he was doing something righteous, as if exposing me was a justice long overdue. In that instant, I realized that my past was not just a private scar. It was a weapon in the hands of someone who knew how to use it. The wedding did not continue. There was no exchange of vows, no first kiss, no celebration with music and laughter. Instead, there was chaos. Daniel walked out of the chapel without a word. My parents stayed frozen, their faces heavy with sorrow, and I was left standing there in my white dress, feeling as though the ground beneath me had given way. That day, my marriage ended before it even began. And the cruelest part was knowing that this was only the beginning of the storm. My past was about to be told to everyone who had ever believed in me. The silence that followed the collapse of my wedding was louder than any noise I had ever heard. For days, I replayed Matthew's words in my head, each syllable dragging me further into despair. I wanted to believe that Daniel would return, that he would call me, that he would ask for my side of the story. But his silence was final. He had walked away, and I knew deep down that he was not coming back. When you are forced to stand in front of the world while your secrets are thrown into the light, there is no easy way to escape the shame. And as much as I wanted to pretend that Matthew was cruel for what he did, I could not deny the truth in his words. My past was messy. My past was reckless. My past was the very reason I stood alone in a wedding dress that now felt like a costume of lies. To explain how everything fell apart, I must take you back to where it all began. I grew up in a small suburban town in the United States, a place where everyone knew everyone, and gossip traveled faster than the wind. My parents raised me in a loving home, but like many teenagers, I rebelled against every boundary they tried to set. I was hungry for freedom, desperate for attention, and careless with my choices. High school was where those choices began to define me. At 15, I met Matthew. He was charming, confident, and older than me by 2 years. To me, that made him exciting. He was not the safe boy next door. He was the boy every girl whispered about, the one who skipped classes and drove his father's car when no one was looking. I felt powerful being chosen by him, as though his attention gave me a sense of worth I could not find within myself. What began as innocent dates quickly spiraled into something else. I wanted so badly to be seen, to be admired, that I ignored the little voice in my head telling me I was moving too fast. And soon, Matthew was not the only boy who knew my weaknesses. One after another, I found myself in situations that left me feeling hollow afterward. I was reckless, driven by the need to prove that I was wanted, even if it meant giving away pieces of myself that I could never take back. By the time I graduated high school, my reputation was no secret. Whispers followed me in the hallways, and parents warned their sons about me. I laughed it off in public, pretending I was confident and unbothered, but at night I cried into my pillow, drowning in regret that I could not admit to anyone. Matthew was there through all of it. Sometimes he joined in the recklessness, and other times he used my mistakes against me during our fights. He knew everything about me, every poor decision, every regret. And when our relationship finally ended in chaos, I thought I had left him, and that part of me, behind forever. But Matthew never forgot. Years passed. I went to college, and slowly I began to rebuild myself. I worked hard, kept to myself, and promised never to fall into the same traps again. That was when I met Daniel. He was nothing like Matthew. He was gentle, respectful, steady. He made me believe that I could have a future free from the shadows of my past. I did not tell him everything. How could I? I was terrified that if he knew, he would never love me. So I buried my history deep inside me and pretended it no longer existed. That was the lie that stood between us the entire time we dated. A lie I convinced myself was harmless because I believed my past did not define my present. But lies, no matter how well buried, eventually crawl back to the surface. Matthew reappeared in my life a month before my wedding. I saw him at a local coffee shop, and my heart nearly stopped. He looked older, more hardened, his eyes colder than I remembered. He smirked when he saw me, as though he had been waiting for that moment. "Getting married, huh?" he said, his tone sharp with mockery. "Does he know who you really are?" I tried to brush it off, told him I was not interested in digging up the past. But Matthew leaned in close and whispered, "Secrets do not stay buried." "Not yours." Not with me. I walked out of that coffee shop shaken, but I convinced myself he would not actually do anything. I was wrong. When he stood at my wedding and spoke those words, he was not only exposing me, he was punishing me for leaving him behind, for moving on, for trying to erase the girl he once knew. He wanted Daniel, my family, and every single guest at that wedding to see the version of me that I had tried so desperately to forget. After the wedding collapsed, I confronted Matthew outside the chapel. My hands were shaking, my voice cracking with anger and humiliation. "Why would you do this to me?" I demanded. His response was simple, but it cut me deeply. "Because you do not deserve to pretend. You hurt people, you lied to them, you lied to yourself. And now everyone knows the truth." I wanted to scream at him, to tell him he was wrong, that I had changed. But deep down, I knew he was right about one thing. I had been pretending. I had hidden the darkest parts of myself and expected my future to be built on that lie. Daniel did not call. Days turned into weeks, and the silence became unbearable. Friends who had once celebrated with me grew distant. My parents could barely look at me without disappointment etched across their faces. The shame clung to me like a second skin, and I realized that my past had not only destroyed my wedding, but had begun to destroy me all over again. But Matthew's cruel confession was not the full story. What I discovered later shocked me even more. His reason for exposing me was not only about revenge, it was also about someone else, someone I had hurt years ago, who had never forgiven me and had fueled Matthew's anger against me. And that revelation was the final blow that broke me. The days after the wedding felt like I was living in a nightmare that refused to end. The white dress still hung in my closet, stiff with memories I wanted to burn. The ring Daniel had given me sat untouched on my dresser, a symbol of promises broken before they had even been spoken. I barely left the house. I could not face the looks of neighbors, the whispers that I knew circulated around town, or the pity that came from those who once admired me. But silence does not heal wounds. It only deepens them. 2 weeks after the failed wedding, I received a letter in the mail. The handwriting was familiar, jagged, sharp, filled with the kind of anger that bleeds through ink. It was from Matthew. Inside was not only a note, but also a photograph. It was a picture from high school, one I had long forgotten, where I stood at a party with a drink in my hand, surrounded by people I barely remembered. My smile in that photo was careless, wild, and empty. Scribbled across the back were the words, "This is who you really are." The note said, "I did not just do this for me, I did it for the people you broke along the way. Do you remember Sarah?" She never forgot, neither did I. The name hit me like a punch to the stomach. Sarah. I had not thought about her in years. She was a girl I had once called a friend in high school, a girl who trusted me. But I betrayed her in one of the worst ways possible. She had been dating a boy who showed me interest, and instead of stepping back, I stepped in. It was reckless, selfish, and cruel. That choice destroyed our friendship, and Sarah never spoke to me again. I convinced myself she would eventually move on, but apparently the wound never healed. And now, years later, she had confided in Matthew. My betrayal had not just lived in the shadows of my memory, it had lived in the scars of the people I had hurt. That was the twist I never expected. Matthew's actions were not only about revenge for himself, they were also a weapon he wielded on behalf of Sarah, a girl I had wronged long ago. Together, they decided to strip me of the life I had built on secrets, exposing me in the most brutal way possible. I wanted to hate them. I wanted to rage against their cruelty. But as I sat there holding that letter, my tears falling onto the ink, I realized that my anger was misplaced. They had only torn open wounds I had created. Daniel eventually called, but not to reconcile. His voice was cold, distant, and final. "I loved you," he said, his words heavy with disappointment. "But you lied by keeping the truth from me. If I had known everything from the start, maybe I could have chosen to accept it. But you never gave me that chance. I cannot build a marriage on a foundation of secrets I tried to speak, to explain, to beg for forgiveness." But he had already made up his mind. Before I could form the words, the line went dead. That was the last time I ever heard his voice. The reality of my life came crashing down. The man I loved was gone. The future I dreamed of had vanished. My family, though still present, looked at me differently. They no longer saw their daughter with hope and promise, but a woman who had let her past destroy everything. I sank into a darkness I had never known before. Every memory from high school came back with painful clarity. The careless laughs, the meaningless choices, the selfish betrayals. I realized that while I had tried to bury my past, I had never truly faced it. I had never apologized, never made amends, never taken responsibility. I had simply hoped that time would erase it. But time is not a healer when the wounds are deep. It is only a mirror that reflects what you refuse to confront. In the weeks that followed, I found myself walking the empty streets of my hometown at night, staring at the houses where my memories lived. I wondered if the people inside remembered me as the girl who made bad choices, or if they had long forgotten. But it did not matter. I remembered, and that memory was enough to haunt me. The final blow came when I ran into Sarah one afternoon at the grocery store. She looked at me with the same coldness she had in high school after I betrayed her. I tried to speak, to apologize, but she walked past me without a word, her silence louder than any insult she could have thrown. In that moment, I realized that some bridges can never be rebuilt, no matter how much time passes. So here I am, telling my story not because I want sympathy, but because I want others to understand the price of secrets. The lies we bury eventually crawl back to the surface, often when we least expect them, often when we have the most to lose. My marriage ended before it even began, not because of Matthew's cruelty, not because of Sarah's pain, but because I refused to face the truth when I had the chance. I have lost Daniel. I have lost my dignity. I have lost the future I thought I deserved. But what I have gained is something I never expected: clarity. The past is not something we can erase. It is something we must own, no matter how painful, because only then can we truly move forward. And so my story ends here, not with a wedding, not with a happy ending, but with a lesson carved into my heart. The truth will always find its way to the surface. And when it does, you can either face it on your own terms, or you can let it destroy you as it destroyed me. Thank you for staying with me through this emotional journey. My story shows how secrets and choices from the past can follow us into the present, no matter how hard we try to bury them. If this touched you in any way, please remember to like, share, and subscribe so that more people can experience these stories with us. Now I want to hear from you. Do you believe people truly deserve a second chance after their past is revealed, or should the truth always determine their future?